This is a response to Zach's video, Why Invade Iraq?
I'm going to point out some of the problems with it.
Saddam Hussein is obviously not a nice man.
Well, I'm glad we can agree on that.
Yeah, now we can agree on it, right? In the 1980s, it was a different story. In 1982, the U.S. State Department removed Iraq from the list of state sponsors of terrorism. It also fought off efforts by the U.S. Congress to put it back on the list in 1985. So there's your concern for human rights. In fact, the concern was so great that they had the goal of increasing U.S. exports. The reason given to, quote, put us in a better position to deal with Iraq regarding its human rights records. That's what the State Department said it with a straight face back in the 1980s. When Saddam attacked Iran, committing a war crime, what country supported him? You know, you guys have a convenient memory. Also, notice the points that I'm making, they're very rarely pointed out in mainstream media. You heard over and over again how Saddam, quote, attacked his own people or killed his own people. How often did you hear with our help? And this is what you should think about. If Saddam is bad, what does that make the U.S. government? They were partners in war crimes. You can find this information at my website, representativepress.org. On there you can see that I have a transcript of where Scott Ritter and Richard Butler were on the Donahue show. And by the way, the Donahue show's ratings were really good. There's a reason he was canceled, and that's because he was showing too much of this information before the Iraq War. And MSNBC was behind doing the war. That's just a fact. On that show, Scott Ritter pointed out that the former head of Iraqi intelligence was told him that the U.S. advisors were sitting there as Iraq planned the inclusion of chemical weapons in the Anfal offensive. That's one of the most famous things you hear about, attacking the Kurds, gassing his own people. As I said, mainstream media leaves out who helped them. And what they leave out also is, where did Saddam come from in the first place? Who would pay a murderous thug to kill the president of Iraq in the late 1950s? Who would do that? CIA. Now, I've never seen mainstream media point that out. Who was behind the coups that put the Ba'ath Party in power in the first place, in the 60s? Who did that? The United States government. Again, I haven't seen mainstream media mention that. Not once did I see them mention that. So perhaps that's why you have a skewed view of what's going on in the world. You and most Americans, unfortunately, because of mainstream media. They omit critical facts that I think many people assume, oh, they'll report that. No, they're not. If you look into it, they're not telling you anywhere close to the whole story. You want a solution? Obey the U.S. Constitution. That's the solution. And in doing so, you're obligated to uphold international law. That's actually part of the U.S. Constitution. It's not optional. And that would solve the problem right there. It would alleviate the suffering in the Middle East to an enormous degree. Because as you can see, if you actually look at the history, you see U.S. involvement in installing these leaders in the first place, in creating the misery in the first place. Obey international law. That's what you have to do. Terrorists weren't coming from Iraq. I think you have a very distorted view of the motives for the terrorism. No one was coming from Iraq blaming the United States for supporting Saddam, because at that point we weren't supporting him. Do you understand that? But the U.S. does support Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and Israel. And hatred of U.S. support of Israel was the main motive for why we were attacked. Now, it would behoove you to look into what Israel has been doing. Go in to look into Israeli human rights organizations and what they have to say about the intentional killing of children by Israeli soldiers. That would be something you should look into. Because again, that's another example of what's not being reported in mainstream media. I recommend the website If Americans Knew. Google that. I think it's americansnew.org. That should give you a lot of info. And also check out my website. I'll put all the links to the right, dealing with the intentional killing of children, violations of international law, and so forth. But that's that would be the solution. If you obey international law, then you diffuse the whole situation. And by the way, it was illegal to attack Iraq. You can't just attack a country because you feel like doing so. That's a violation of the U.S. Constitution, which obligates us to uphold international law. You can't do that. Iraq had not threatened us, and it's absurd to say, well, they might give weapons to terrorists. Yeah, why didn't they? Why didn't they, in all those years, do so? That's absurd. It's obviously an excuse just to start a war. I mean, that's insane kind of reasoning. Well, someone might, yeah, China might, Russia might right this minute. Let's just attack every country in the world just because you might. Actually, Saddam, he refused to use weapons of mass destruction on us even after we attacked him in the first Gulf War. So the track record is he's reluctant to use them and was unwilling to use them against us. So this nonsense, oh, he might. It's contrived bullshit.
The al-Qaeda leader wanted to punish the United States for supporting Israel. He allegedly told KSM it would be sufficient simply to down the planes and not hit specific targets.
I'm trying to get so much information out. I'm going to make more videos about this. So please subscribe. Please tell other people to subscribe.